Why was he laughing at the gate? It was the kind of laugh that cut through the dust-filled air, careless, mocking, out of place in a world where rules weren't theater but lifelines. The convoy had slowed, engines rattling, boots hitting the dirt in a rhythm of fatigue. And yet, amid the heat shimmering above the sand and the hard silence that clung to the checkpoint, one soldier smirked as if it were all a game. The guard didn't move. She didn't need to. One hand rested lightly on her weapon, the other on the strap across her chest. Her eyes stayed fixed on the man in front of her. She hadn't spoken since they arrived. Not once. He sneered, shifting his weight. "Come on, this is ridiculous," he muttered loud enough for the others to hear. "What's she gonna do? Stare us into submission?" A few nervous chuckles rippled from the back of the line, the kind of chuckles men make when they want to believe they're braver than they feel. But the silence unsettled them. Rules mattered here. Everyone knew it, everyone but him. The officer in charge cleared his throat, uneasy, but the guard still didn't flinch. Her gaze was steady, unreadable, as if she could see more than just his grin, as if she could see past him into him. The young private's smirk wavered, just slightly, enough that his jaw tightened to cover it. "You're not gonna shoot me for walking past a line, are you?" he said, raising his voice again, defiance masking nerves. She didn't answer. That was the thing about silence. It stripped away excuses. It forced a man to hear his own voice echo back at him, thin, uncertain. And beneath the sun, with the taste of dust in the air, his laughter faltered. Her name was Captain Elena Rios. But no one here knew her story. To them, she was just the silent guard on the perimeter, assigned to enforce rules that everyone else grumbled about. They didn't know why she chose silence over speech. They didn't know what it cost her. Once, years ago, she had been louder than anyone. The crackle of comms filled with her voice, firm and clear. Orders given with precision, calls made with urgency. She had been the kind of soldier others trusted instinctively. Her words carried weight. Until the night they didn't. A valley carved by shadows, radio chatter blurring into static, a voice on the other end that sounded right too right. And Elena, tired, pressed, made the call. A simple confirmation, just a few words. It was enough. The enemy was listening. They moved before her team did. Two of her friends never came back. Since then, words had been dangerous. Dangerous to trust, dangerous to use. Silence became her shield. The convoy shifted nervously as the guard held her ground. The young private, his name was Hayes, stuffed his hands into his vest pockets as if the gesture could hide his unease. His grin had faded completely now. Behind him, one of the sergeants muttered, "Just shut up, Hayes. You don't know who you're messing with." Hayes rolled his eyes, but his voice stayed low this time. "She hasn't even said anything." Exactly. The officers watching couldn't explain it either, but they felt it, the gravity in her quiet. She didn't need words. Her silence carried more command than shouting ever could. And when Hayes finally stepped back, muttering under his breath, the checkpoint moved forward again. No confrontation, no escalation, just silence enforcing rules more powerfully than 100 shouted orders. But Elena's heart wasn't calm, not really. Behind her stillness was a storm. That night when the desert cooled and the generators hummed like insects in the distance, Elena sat alone at the edge of camp. She opened her notebook, its corners bent, pages soft with wear. In the dim light she wrote a name, just one. She always started with one. Lara. Then another. Medina. The names of the ones she had lost. She didn't say them out loud. She never did. To speak them would make the silence unbearable, but to write them, that was survival, a ritual, a reminder. Every rule she enforced, every line she guarded, every silence she held, it wasn't for her anymore. It was for them. And that was why the laughter earlier had cut so deeply. Hayes didn't know what he mocked. He thought he was mocking rules, but he was mocking ghosts. Why doesn't she talk? One soldier asked at dinner, his voice pitched low as if she might hear across the hall. Some people don't need to, another replied. Hayes shook his head, bitterness still in his tone. It's an act, that's all it is. Nobody that tough. You put her under real pressure, she'll crack. Elena didn't look up from her tray, didn't respond, didn't give him the satisfaction. But inside, his words pressed on a wound that never healed. Because Hayes wasn't wrong, not entirely. She had cracked once, and the sound of it still haunted her. The orders came 2 days later. A recon unit needed escort north. The roads weren't safe, the intelligence wasn't clear, but the mission couldn't wait. Normally, Elena would have been left at her post. Guards stayed behind. Guards enforced lines. But someone higher up had pulled her file. They'd seen the records, the commendations, the missions she had survived. And just like that, she was assigned to lead point. Hayes was on the list too. When he saw her name, his smirk returned. Oh, this is perfect. The mute guard is leading us now. What are we supposed to follow her hand signals and vibes? The others chuckled, but uneasily. They had seen her silence unsettle him before. Still, doubt lingered. Elena didn't react. She simply checked her gear, adjusted her vest, and kept moving. Because what Hayes didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Elena was more dangerous quiet than anyone else was loud. The convoy rolled out under a pale dawn. Light spilled across the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and ash. The engines drummed low, steady. Soldiers shifted in their seats, eyes scanning the horizon. Hayes leaned back, arms crossed, watching Elena at the front. She's gonna fold, he muttered. First sign of trouble, she'll freeze. No one answered, not this time. Because somewhere in the silence, even they felt it. She was not ordinary. And when the road narrowed into jagged rock, and the first hint of movement stirred in the hills above, they would see why. But for now they only saw her back, straight, steady, unshaken. And silence holding them all together. Why did the hills feel alive? That was the first thought that pressed into Elena's mind as the convoy crept through the narrow pass. The rocks were still, the shadows stretched, but something about the silence had changed. It was no longer her silence. It was theirs. The silence of men waiting, watching, holding their breath behind stone. She raised her fist without turning her head. The signal was small, precise. The convoy slowed instantly, tires crunching against gravel. Boots shifted. Weapons clicked faintly as safeties were checked. Hayes groaned from his position a few vehicles back. Oh, come on, she's stalling already. There's nothing here. His voice carried, too loud, bouncing off the canyon walls. Elena didn't turn, didn't argue. She simply stayed still, scanning the ridges. Because something was there. She could feel it in the air. The kind of weight you only learn to recognize after nights of ambush, after valleys where silence meant death. And she was not about to let history repeat itself. The driver glanced at her in the mirror, waiting for the order that never came. Elena simply tapped her fingers once against the edge of the door, a code only those who had served under her before would understand. Wait. The younger soldiers shifted restlessly, caught between trust and doubt. One of them whispered, "What's she even looking at?" Another replied softer, "She knows something." But Hayes scoffed, his laughter sharp. "No, she's just scared." The words hit harder than he intended. For a flicker of a moment, Elena's throat tightened. Because he wasn't wrong, not completely. Fear was in her chest, not the wild kind that panicked. The quiet kind, the kind that remembered. The canyon smelled of dust like that valley years ago. The air hummed faintly with the same unease. And in her mind, voices returned, comms buzzing, the sound of her own command breaking through, too quick, too certain. Then gunfire, screams, static. She blinked hard, focused. This wasn't then. This was now. And this time she would not let silence turn against her. Minutes passed, too long. The convoy was exposed. The officers glanced at one another, restless. Then, just as one of them opened his mouth to question her, a stone shifted high on the ridge. It was small, a whisper of movement, but Elena's eyes caught it instantly. She raised her hand again, sharp, commanding. Everyone froze, weapons lifted. Hayes muttered, "This is." The first shot cracked. It echoed through the canyon like thunder splitting the sky. Chaos erupted. Bullets sparked against metal. Soldiers ducked, shouting, scrambling for cover. Dust exploded into the air. But Elena didn't flinch. She moved. Her commands were silent, hand signals cutting through the storm with precision. She directed fire, shifted men into cover, pointed toward the ridges. Her silence was not absence, it was clarity. No wasted breath, no confusion, just action. Hayes froze, eyes wide as he saw her step into open ground. For a heartbeat he thought she'd lost her mind. But then he watched as she crouched low, sighted the source of fire, and gestured to two soldiers to flank. They obeyed without hesitation. Because in her silence there was no doubt. Grenades arced, rocks shattered, the enemy scrambled, and slowly, methodically, the ambush collapsed. When the gunfire faded, the canyon was smoke and echoes. The convoy was shaken but intact. And Elena was still standing. The aftermath was heavy with breathing. The younger soldiers glanced at one another, adrenaline still rushing. One finally whispered, "She saved us." Hayes said nothing. His smirk was gone, wiped clean by the shock of what he'd seen. His chest rose and fell too quickly, sweat glistening on his face. He had mocked her silence, but in that chaos it had spoken louder than any shouted order he'd ever heard. Elena didn't look at him. She simply checked the wounded, moved between vehicles, and gave small nods of reassurance. Her eyes softened for a moment when one soldier clutched her arm, whispering, "Thanks, ma'am." She nodded once, no words. Inside, though, her heart hammered. Because for a moment, just a moment, the echo of her past had almost broken through. That night they made camp in the open desert. The stars hung sharp and cold above them, the silence vast and almost sacred. Soldiers huddled around dim lights, trading stories to keep the darkness at bay. Hayes sat apart, restless. His eyes kept drifting toward Elena, who sat cross-legged, cleaning her weapon with slow, deliberate motions. She hadn't spoken once since the ambush. Not a command, not a single word of comfort. And yet everyone trusted her now, even the ones who had doubted. Hayes shook his head, muttering under his breath, "How does she do that? How does she keep so damn quiet?" A sergeant nearby replied, voice low, "Because she doesn't need to talk. She's already seen enough to know when words don't matter." Hayes frowned. What's that supposed to mean? The sergeant didn't answer. But Elena heard. Her hands paused for the briefest second, memories flickering like shadows at the edge of firelight. She remembered the names in her notebook. The friends lost because of words spoken too quickly, too confidently. She tightened her jaw, forcing the memories down. Silence was safety. Silence was strength. Yet in the quiet of the desert night, she wondered if silence was also a cage. Later, Hayes approached her, hesitant, awkward, his voice low enough not to carry. "Hey, thanks, back there. I didn't think." He trailed off, scratching the back of his neck. He was waiting for something, for her to accept or dismiss or even scold. But Elena only looked at him, her eyes steady, unreadable. And then she went back to cleaning her weapon. The silence stung. Hayes felt it like a weight in his chest. He had wanted forgiveness or recognition or anything that might soften the shame he carried, but she gave him nothing. Because silence wasn't about him. It was about her. When the camp settled into uneasy sleep, Elena stayed awake. She pulled out her notebook again, writing the names slowly, one after another. Her hand lingered on one in particular, Lara. Her best friend, the one who used to laugh at rules too, the one who teased Elena for being too by the book. The one who died because Elena had spoken when she should have stayed quiet. Elena closed her eyes, the desert wind brushing against her face. Hayes's laughter earlier, his arrogance, had been like hearing Lara again. But Lara wasn't here to learn the cost. Maybe Hayes still could. Maybe silence could teach him what words never would. The convoy moved again at dawn. The air was sharp, the light cruel against tired eyes. Elena led at the front, steady as ever, while Hayes trailed a few vehicles back, his expression darker than before. For the first time he didn't mock, he didn't laugh, he watched. And as the road stretched before them, unknown, dangerous, alive with the possibility of more waiting silence, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, he had been wrong all along. Elena didn't notice, or maybe she did. Either way, she kept moving forward, quiet, steady, because she knew the road wasn't finished with them yet. Not by far. Why was the road so quiet? Too quiet. That was the thought gnawing at every soldier in the convoy as the sun climbed higher, beating down on metal and skin alike. Usually there was life here, distant shepherds, scattered huts, echoes of movement. But today, nothing. Just the hum of engines, the creak of gear, and the endless, watching silence. Elena rode at the front again, eyes scanning the horizon with a precision sharpened by years of scars. To anyone else, she looked like stone, calm, unshaken. But inside, her heart marked every mile with questions she couldn't silence. Had they been spotted already? Were more ambushes waiting? Was this stretch of emptiness a blessing or a trap? Behind her, Hayes shifted uncomfortably, his gaze flicking from the ridges to Elena's back. He hadn't made a single joke since the canyon fight, but the weight of his silence wasn't discipline, it was confusion. He still didn't understand her. And part of him hated that. The officer riding in the second vehicle leaned out, calling toward her. "Captain, we're burning daylight. Any reason for the crawl?" Elena lifted her hand, palm down, pressing it twice toward the earth, steady. Her eyes never left the ridges. The officer sighed, frustration edging his voice, but he didn't argue, not after what had happened in the canyon. Hayes muttered under his breath, "She thinks she can just feel danger, like some kind of sixth sense." His tone was bitter but quieter than before. A sergeant beside him replied, "Maybe she can. You saw what happened yesterday. We'd all be dead if she hadn't stopped us." Hayes looked away, jaw tight. He wanted to deny it, wanted to hold onto the comfort of his old cynicism. But the images wouldn't leave his mind. The sharp crack of gunfire, the way she had moved without hesitation, the silence that had turned into commands clearer than shouting ever could. He hated how much sense it made. The convoy crawled into a narrow stretch of road boxed in by hills. Shadows cut across the dirt like scars. Elena raised her fist again. Vehicles slowed. The soldiers tensed, fingers brushing triggers. Eyes scanned every ridge, every slit of rock. Nothing. Seconds dragged, sweat rolled down necks, still nothing. Then, a child's cry. Soft, thin, carried by the wind. It came from a cluster of ruined stone houses on the ridge to the right. The convoy froze. Soldiers exchanged glances, uneasy. Hayes frowned. What the hell? The cry came again, higher this time. Elena's jaw tightened. She raised two fingers, gesturing the unit to hold position. Then she pointed toward the houses. A small team broke off, climbing cautiously. Hayes shook his head. "It's bait, has to be. They're setting us up." The sergeant replied, "Maybe, but if there's a kid." Hayes didn't answer. And Elena didn't explain. The team reached the houses. A few minutes passed in tense silence. Then the radio crackled, clear, just a girl, maybe 6, no family in sight. Relief rippled through some of the soldiers, but not Elena. Because the girl's eyes, when she was brought down, told a different story. Wide, frightened, silent. She clutched a ragged doll against her chest, her body trembling even in the heat. Hayes frowned. "So what now? We can't just leave her here." The officer hesitated, looking to Elena. for guidance, for a decision. Elena crouched in front of the child. Their eyes met. For a moment the world fell away, the convoy, the hills, the mission. All she saw was herself. Because she had been this girl once, not in body but in spirit, a survivor of something she couldn't control, carrying silence because words were too dangerous. Elena's throat ached, but no sound came. Instead, she reached into her vest pocket and pulled out a small pack of crackers. She placed them gently in the girl's hands. The child stared at her, then slowly nodded. No words, just understanding. The convoy moved again. The girl left safely in care of a nearby Allied post they encountered down the road. But the silence lingered. Hayes sat stiffly, his mind replaying the moment. The way Elena had looked at the girl. The way the girl had looked back, neither speaking. Yet somehow it had been the clearest exchange of the whole mission. It bothered him, not because it was wrong, but because it was right. That night as they camped near a dry riverbed, the soldiers settled into their routines, checking weapons, trading rations, murmuring stories of home. The air was thick with fatigue and the weight of what they'd seen. Hayes wandered close to where Elena sat with her notebook. He hesitated, then spoke. "Back there with the girl, you knew, didn't you? You knew it wasn't a trap." Elena's hand stilled over the paper. For a moment, she didn't look up. Then she closed the notebook and set it aside, her expression unreadable. Hayes waited, fidgeted, finally blurted, "Why don't you ever talk? What is it, some discipline thing, or are you just too good for the rest of us?" A few heads turned, listening. The fire crackled. Elena's eyes met his. For a heartbeat, it seemed like she might actually answer. But instead she stood, picked up her rifle, and walked into the shadows beyond the firelight. Hayes swore under his breath, but inside frustration was mixing with something else, curiosity. Because her silence wasn't emptiness, it was armor, and he wanted to know what she was protecting beneath it. Hours later, Elena sat alone at the riverbed, staring at the reflection of stars in the shallow water. She pulled the notebook from her pocket, flipping to a page worn thin by ink. Lara's name, always Lara's name. She whispered it just once, her voice barely audible. It hurt like glass in her throat. She closed the book quickly, pressing it to her chest. Then she forced the silence back into place. Because if she let it break, even for a moment, she feared everything inside her would come spilling out. And out here, in the dark, with men like Hayes watching, she couldn't afford that. The next morning the convoy rolled again. The road opened into wide plains, the horizon stretching endless and harsh. The mission briefing had promised a checkpoint ahead, but as the hours dragged, no sign appeared. Elena's instincts prickled. Something was off. She raised her hand to slow the convoy. And that was when they heard it. Not a cry this time, not gunfire, but the low, distant hum of engines, approaching fast. From the east. Hayes stiffened, eyes widening as dust rose on the horizon. Dozens of vehicles, not theirs. "Contact," someone breathed. Elena's pulse steadied, her silence hardened into steel. Because this wasn't an ambush in shadows anymore. This was open ground, a test not just of survival but of endurance. And this time, Hayes would see exactly what silence was made of. Why did the sound feel heavier than the earth itself? Engines, low, growling, multiplying across the horizon. The convoy stopped cold, dust drifting in the sharp morning air. Every soldier's chest tightened as the hum grew into a roar. Elena stood at the front, hand on her rifle, her silhouette framed against the glare of rising sun. She didn't speak. She didn't flinch. She just watched the dust clouds rolling closer, 30, maybe 40 vehicles, bearing down on them across open ground. "Gade," one soldier muttered. Another whispered, "We can't take that." Hayes's jaw clenched. He looked from the horizon to Elena, desperate for an answer, for words, for anything to break the crushing silence. But she gave none. Instead, she raised her hand and pointed, a sharp gesture commanding, "Move." And somehow they did. The convoy scrambled into defensive positions. Vehicles formed a staggered line. Soldiers dropped to the ground, rifles braced, eyes squinting against the glare. The officer barked half-formed orders, but it was Elena's signals that cut through the panic, precise, undeniable. Hayes crouched behind the tire of an armored truck, his hands trembling against his rifle. He hated it, hated the way fear clawed at his chest, the way silence filled his ears louder than any explosion. He stole a glance at Elena. She was kneeling on one knee, eyes steady, weapon ready, not a flicker of hesitation. And for the first time, Hayes realized something. She wasn't silent because she was cold. She was silent because fear had no hold on her anymore. Because she had already lost everything words could take. The enemy vehicles drew closer. Dust churned, the sound rising into a storm. Then came the crack of gunfire slicing through the open air. Bullets tore into dirt and steel. Soldiers hit the ground, returning fire in desperate bursts. The convoy shook with the force of impact. Elena's hand signals cut through chaos like blades. Shift right, hold fire, wait, then strike. Grenades arced high, exploding against the lead vehicles. Dust and flames swallowed the horizon. The line staggered, slowed. Soldiers roared, emboldened by the sudden pushback. But the enemy kept coming. Hayes fired wildly, every shot a mix of panic and instinct. He ducked low, teeth clenched, muttering, "We're screwed, we're screwed." Then a hand clamped his shoulder. He looked up, Elena. Her eyes locked on his, calm, focused, no words. And somehow the storm inside him slowed. They fought like that for minutes that stretched into lifetimes. Heat, dust, the stench of burning oil, shouts cut off mid-breath. Elena moved like she was back in the cockpit, every motion calculated, every choice weighed. She directed squads with nothing but her hands and eyes, and slowly, impossibly, the convoy held. Hayes followed her movements without realizing it. He found himself firing where she pointed, moving where she signaled. Each time he survived. Each time he began to trust. It felt unnatural, trusting silence, but silence was saving him. The battle dragged, ammunition thinned. The enemy faltered, regrouped, pressed again. Soldiers whispered prayers between bursts of gunfire. Elena crouched low, scanning, searching. Her chest heaved with breath, but her face never broke. She saw patterns others missed, vehicles shifting left, fighters circling wide. She raised her hand, signaling the flank. Hayes followed. He fired where she told him. He moved when she gestured, and each time it made sense. Until a shot cracked past his ear, too close. He fell hard into the dirt, ears ringing, vision blurring. For a moment, panic returned. His rifle slipped from his hands. But Elena was there. She dragged him behind cover with strength he hadn't expected. She pressed his weapon back into his hands, her eyes sharp. No words. Just a look. Stand up, fight. Hayes's chest burned. He swallowed hard, and for the first time he obeyed without question. The battle turned slowly, painfully. Smoke drifted thick across the field. The enemy vehicles pulled back, one by one, retreating into the haze. The ground was littered with shattered steel, burning rubber, bodies that would never rise again. When the last engine faded into distance, the silence that followed was crushing. Not peace, not relief, just the heavy breath of survivors realizing they had lived through something that should have killed them. Hayes collapsed against the tire, chest heaving. His hands shook, his face streaked with dust and sweat. He looked at Elena. She stood in the smoke, rifle at her side, eyes scanning the horizon. Her shoulders sagged only slightly, the weight of command pressing down. Not once had she spoken. And yet she had carried them through. The medics moved quickly, tending to the wounded. Soldiers whispered in disbelief, "We held. We should be dead." She saved us. Hayes sat in silence, his thoughts tangled. He hated her less now. Maybe he didn't hate her at all. Maybe what he hated was himself, for laughing at rules, for mocking what he didn't understand, for needing her silence to survive. He pushed up to his feet, walking toward her. His voice was low, hoarse. I'm sorry for before, for everything I said." Elena's eyes met his, steady, unreadable. She gave a single nod, then turned away. The apology wasn't for her, not really, and she knew it. That night the survivors built a small fire. Not for warmth, it was still hot, but for something to cling to. Flames danced, shadows stretched, and men spoke softly about near misses, about families back home, about fear. Hayes sat apart, watching Elena in the firelight. She held her notebook again, writing slowly, deliberately. He wanted to ask what it was, who it was for, why she carried it like a burden. But he didn't. Because for the first time he began to understand. Her silence wasn't emptiness. It was memory. Hours later, unable to sleep, Hayes wandered closer. He hesitated, then spoke. "You saved my life today." Elena didn't look up. "I know you don't talk," Hayes continued, awkward, unsure. "But if you ever did, if you ever wanted to, I'd listen. That's all I'm saying." He waited. She closed the notebook, her hands tightening around it. For a moment her lips parted, the air caught, her chest rose, but no sound came. Instead, she stood and walked away, disappearing into the shadows beyond the fire. Hayes exhaled, shaking his head. "Guess not," he muttered. But what he didn't see, what no one saw, was Elena pressing her notebook tight against her chest in the dark, whispering a single name into the night. Lara. The name that still tore her apart, the name she could never say aloud in the daylight. By dawn, the convoy rolled again. Fewer voices now, more silence. The open plain stretched endless before them, the mission still unfinished. Hayes sat in the back, staring at Elena's back as she led, and for the first time his silence matched hers. Not mocking, not bitter. Just silent. Because he was beginning to learn what she already knew. Sometimes silence was heavier than words. Sometimes silence was survival. How many miles could silence stretch before it broke? The convoy moved through valleys that swallowed sound, cliffs towering on either side, shadows creeping like hunters. Every wheel turned heavy, every engine growled low, but no one spoke above a whisper. Not after yesterday. Not after the silence had saved them. Hayes sat near the rear, his rifle across his lap, his eyes tracing the ridges above. Too easy for an ambush, too easy for death. He swallowed hard, his throat dry. He hated waiting, hated not knowing when the next bullet might come. But when he looked at her, the woman at the front, the one who hadn't spoken a word, something in his chest steadied. Elena, the guard who enforced rules without ever saying why. The one he once mocked, now leading them deeper into unknown. And yet what rules had shaped her silence? What had she lost that left her unable or unwilling to speak? The officer tried again. He always tried. "We're low on fuel," he said, voice tense. "We'll have to stop within the next 30 miles, find cover, refuel, if they come at us again." His voice broke off. Because Elena raised her hand, just a flick of her fingers. "Stop." The convoy braked hard. Dust rose, tires grinding. Soldiers clutched their rifles, hearts pounding. Eyes darted up the cliffs, scanning for movement. Hayes's pulse quickened. Nothing, just rock, just silence. Then he heard it. A faint metallic clink. High above. Sniper. The first shot cracked like lightning, ricocheting off steel. Soldiers dove, scattering for cover. Echoes slammed through the valley. More clinks followed, the sound of rifles shifting, finding targets. Hayes flattened himself behind a crate. The world felt impossibly narrow, every second drawn out. His ears rang with the sound of bullets hitting dirt, metal, flesh. Then he saw her. Elena out in the open, scanning. Calm, still. Her eyes flickered up, calculating angles, distances. Without hesitation, she grabbed the nearest soldier's shoulder, yanking him down just as a bullet tore the air where his head had been. She didn't shout, she didn't curse, she didn't panic. Her silence was sharper than any command. The officer tried yelling orders, but his voice drowned in chaos. Soldiers scattered, unsure, frightened. And then they started watching her. Elena pointed to the ridge. She traced with her hand, 3 positions, move left, flank. Hayes felt the pull before he thought. He sprinted low, weaving between rocks, his breath ragged. Bullets slammed into dirt around him. He dropped to his belly, heart thundering. Through the scope of his rifle, he found one of them, shapes in the shadows, muzzle flashing. He squeezed the trigger, missed. Dirt spit near the figure. He cursed under his breath, adjusted, fired again. This time the target fell. And when Hayes glanced back, Elena's eyes met his. Just a flicker, a nod, approval. It was absurd how much it mattered. The firefight dragged on, bursts of gunfire echoing off stone walls. 2 soldiers were down, medics crawling through dust to drag them back. Hayes's chest burned with adrenaline, his hands slick against his rifle. But Elena, she never faltered. Every gesture was precise, every move efficient. She shifted them like chess pieces across a board only she could see. And slowly, painfully, they pushed the enemy back. The ridge went silent again, just echoes fatting, just bodies slumped against stone. Hayes exhaled so hard it almost broke him. His arms trembled, his face coated in sweat and dirt. And then it hit him. Without her silence, without her signals, they'd all be dead. Later, when the convoy stopped under a stretch of jagged rock for refueling, Hayes sat against a tire, staring at the ground. The officer paced, rattling about fuel reserves and schedules, his words barely touching reality. Hayes lifted his head. Elena was there alone, cleaning her rifle with deliberate motions. She hadn't touched food, hadn't rested, just worked. He couldn't hold it anymore. He walked to her, crouched nearby. "Why don't you talk?" No response. He pressed, "Is it you can't or you won't?" Her hands paused, a flicker of something in her eyes, but still silence. Hayes's frustration burned, but not with anger now, with need. He wanted to understand. "You saved us twice, and I don't even know why you're here." His voice cracked, lower now. "I don't know who you are, just give me something, anything." Her gaze shifted to him. Her eyes softened, just barely. Then she reached into her vest and pulled out the notebook. She opened it, wrote a single word. "Rules." Then closed it. Hayes blinked. "Rules." She didn't answer, didn't need to. But the word burrowed deep. What kind of rules? Military, personal, something else? He wanted to demand more, but he stopped himself. He saw the way her hand tightened on that notebook, the way her breath hitched. This wasn't just rules of engagement. This was something she lived by, something that cost her. He sat back, silent. For the first time, he let her silence be enough. That night the stars were merciless. Cold light spilled across the desert, uncaring, eternal. The convoy slept fitfully, weapons clutched close. Hayes lay awake, staring at the sky, his mind replaying every look, every gesture, every silent command. He thought of her word, rules. What rules could strip someone of their voice? He remembered her whisper the night before. He hadn't heard it, but he had seen her lips move around a name when she thought no one was watching. A name. And suddenly, he wondered if her silence wasn't a choice at all, but a vow. At dawn, the mission pressed on. The convoy rolled through broken terrain, wheels grinding over rock and sand. Every mile felt heavier than the last. Hayes sat across from her in the truck bed. He caught himself watching her too long, the set of her jaw, the way her eyes scanned every horizon, the scars etched along her hand, faint but real. He thought of the men who had mocked her, himself among them. and shame twisted deep in his gut. She carried more than silence, she carried ghosts. And he wanted to know them. By midday they reached a plateau, a vantage point stretching for miles. The officer ordered a halt. Soldiers dismounted, wary but grateful for high ground. Elena walked to the edge, scanning, her rifle slung. Wind whipped dust around her, tugging at her uniform. Hayes joined her. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said softly. She didn't nod, didn't shake her head, just stared. And he realized beauty wasn't what she saw. She saw threats, roots, traps. Because she couldn't afford beauty anymore. Minutes later, a soldier approached Hayes, lowering his voice. "You know why she doesn't talk, right?" Hayes shook his head. The soldier hesitated. "They say she was pilot once, before all this. Lost her co-pilot when she broke protocol. She survived, he didn't. After that, she stopped talking." Hayes froze. A pilot, a partner, a broken rule. He turned back to her, the word echoing in his skull. Rules. Not because she loved them. Because one broken rule had cost her everything. And her silence was the punishment she carried. Hayes's throat tightened. He wanted to ask her if it was true. He wanted to break the wall between them. But when he saw her standing there, eyes fixed on the horizon, the wind cutting against her face, he stopped. Because maybe the silence wasn't his to break. Maybe all he could do was walk beside it. The convoy rolled again. The road ahead was longer, darker, more dangerous. The enemy wasn't done. The mission wasn't over. And Hayes knew something now. Rules weren't a joke. They were the line between life and death. And she, the silent guard, was the only reason he was still breathing. Why did the air feel like it was holding its breath? The convoy entered a canyon so narrow the sky looked like a scar above them. Sheer walls pressed close on both sides, every shadow too deep, every echo too sharp. Engines rumbled low, tires grinding against rock. Soldiers shifted uneasily, their rifles clutched tight. Hayes sat with his back stiff, eyes darting between the cliffs. He hated this. Trapped ground. Nowhere to run, nowhere to fight except straight ahead or straight back. His chest throbbed with tension. Elena walked at the front as always, her rifle steady, her head turning with sharp, practiced movements. She didn't need to speak. Her posture alone told them all the same truth. This was the place it would happen. And then it did. The first blast tore through the canyon like thunder. Rock splintered. Heat and dust swallowed the convoy. Vehicles lurched sideways, tires blown apart. Men were thrown down hard, their shouts drowned by the echoing roar. Before anyone could recover, gunfire poured from above. Dozens of muzzles lit the ridges, bullets raining down. The canyon became a cage of chaos. Hayes dropped instantly, rolling behind cover. His ears rang. His breath hitched. He fired upward blindly, but the angles were impossible. Trapped rats in a pit. The officer screamed into his radio. Orders, panic. None of it mattered. Because Elena was already moving. She sprinted through dust and fire, not to fight back, but to climb. Her hands found cracks in the wall, her boots scraping rock as she scaled upward. "Where the hell is she going?" Hayes shouted, his voice breaking. But when he followed her with his eyes, he understood. The shooters were high, dug in. The only way to break them was to rise. She didn't hesitate, didn't look back, just climbed. Bullets chipped stone near her head. Dust clouded her vision. But she kept moving up into the teeth of death. And for the first time, Hayes realized something terrifying. She wasn't climbing to save herself. She was climbing because she had nothing left to lose. He couldn't stop himself. He scrambled after her, fingers bleeding as he pulled against jagged rock. His chest burned with every heave. He hated climbing. He hated the canyon. But he hated the thought of her dying alone even more. By the time he reached the first ledge, his arms trembled like fire. Elena was already there, crouched low, sliding silently toward the nearest shooter. One swift movement, knife across the throat, quiet, precise. Hayes flinched. He had killed before, but never like that, never so intimate, so silent. She glanced back, meeting his eyes for a fraction of a second. A warning, stay quiet, stay alive. Then she was gone again, moving like a shadow. Hayes crept forward, rifle ready. He found another shooter leaning out, firing down at the convoy. He swallowed hard, lined up his sights, pulled the trigger. The man fell. Hayes's stomach lurched, bile rising in his throat. He wiped his mouth, forcing himself to crawl on. He couldn't think, couldn't stop, could only follow. And always she was there ahead of him, silent, deadly, unstoppable. Together they worked their way along the ridge, taking down shooters one by one. Below, the convoy fought to survive, pinned but no longer helpless. Every kill cut the enemy fire thinner. Every silent step shifted the battle. Until finally, the last shooter dropped. And the canyon went still. The silence that followed was heavier than the gunfire. Soldiers below looked up in disbelief. Some cheered weakly, others just slumped in exhaustion. Hayes sat on the ridge, his chest heaving, his hands stained with dirt and blood. He looked at her, standing tall against the cliffside, smoke drifting in the rising sun. She hadn't spoken a word, but she had saved them all, again. And he couldn't hold back anymore. Why? His voice cracked raw. Why do you keep doing this? Why do you throw yourself into it like you don't care if you live or die? She turned, her face shadowed, unreadable. He pressed harder, his voice rising. Talk to me, damn it. Tell me why you're silent. Tell me what the hell you're carrying. For a moment, just a moment, he thought she might. Her lips parted. Her eyes shimmered with something almost human, almost breakable. Then she pulled out the notebook and wrote one word. Lara. Hayes stared. Lara. She didn't explain. She just closed the notebook, pressing it to her chest like a shield. Then she walked past him, down the ridge, back toward the convoy. Hayes sat frozen, the name echoing in his mind. Lara, who was she? A sister, a daughter, a comrade. Whoever she was, Elena carried her like a wound that would never heal. And suddenly, Hayes understood why silence was her rule. Because some names were too heavy to speak. That night the survivors camped just outside the canyon. The fires burned low, shadows stretching long. Medics worked quietly, bandaging wounds, counting the cost. Hayes sat apart, his mind gnawing on the name, Lara. He remembered the rumors, the co-pilot she lost, the broken rule, the silence. Was Lara the one who died in that cockpit, or someone else entirely? He couldn't stop replaying it. The way Elena's hand shook when she wrote it. The way her eyes burned when she closed the notebook. And for the first time, he wished desperately that she would speak. Not for orders, not for survival, but so he could understand her pain. Later, when the camp had quieted, Hayes approached her. She was sitting alone, the notebook in her lap, the firelight painting her face in gold and shadow. He crouched slowly, his voice low. I don't know who Lara is, but I think she's why you fight and why you don't speak. Her eyes flickered sharp. She didn't nod, didn't deny. Hayes swallowed hard. I just want you to know you don't have to carry it alone, not anymore. For the first time, he thought he saw her walls crack. Her hand trembled slightly as she closed the notebook. Her breath hitched. But still no words came. Instead, she reached out just briefly, her hand brushing his arm. And then she pulled away, vanishing into the darkness beyond the fire. Hayes sat there long after she left, the touch still burning on his skin. He didn't know what it meant. He didn't know if it was trust or warning or something else entirely. But he knew one thing. He would follow her, wherever this road led. Because her silence wasn't emptiness, it was truth. And that truth was dragging him deeper than he'd ever meant to go. By dawn, the convoy rolled again. Their numbers smaller, their fuel thinner, their faces older, but they moved, always forward. The officer no longer barked orders. Soldiers no longer looked to him. They looked to her, the silent guard, the one who had rules no one else understood, the one whose silence weighed more than speeches ever could. And Hayes he looked too, not out of mockery, not out of frustration, but out of something new, something fragile. Respect. And yet he knew the truth. Respect alone wouldn't keep them alive. Something darker was waiting ahead. Something that would finally break the silence, or bury them all in it. Why did the horizon look like it was waiting to swallow them whole? The convoy stretched thin across the desert floor, engines growling low, shadows trailing long behind. The sun dipped toward evening, casting the world in gold and red. Soldiers clung to weapons like lifelines, their eyes hollow from days of battle. Hayes sat with his back against the rattling truck, his gaze fixed on her. Elena, still silent, still leading, still carrying that notebook pressed to her chest whenever the engine slowed. He had stopped asking why she never spoke, stopped mocking, stopped demanding answers, but the question never left him. Who was Lara, and why did her name live like a wound behind Elena's silence? The road ahead wasn't just dangerous, it was a reckoning. Hayes felt it in his bones. The first sign came at dusk, a single plume of smoke in the distance, too black, too heavy to be natural. The officer raised binoculars, swore under his breath. Wreckage recent. The convoy slowed, tension spiking. The wreck came into view, burned-out vehicles, twisted steel still smoldering, the ground scarred by explosions. Bodies lay scattered, uniforms torn, some familiar insignias, allies. A medic muttered a prayer. Another soldier turned away, bile rising. Hayes stared at the charred remains of a transport truck, its frame melted, the wheels barely attached. His stomach turned. Elena moved forward, kneeling by the wreck. Her hand brushed over blackened steel, her eyes locked on something unseen. And then Hayes saw it too. A helmet cracked, burned, letters still visible on the side. Lara. His breath caught, the world tilted. Not a sister, not a daughter, not just a name. A person, a soldier. Her co-pilot. Hayes's chest tightened, the pieces snapping into place. The rumors, the silence, the broken rule. Lara wasn't just someone Elena had lost. Lara was the voice she could never forgive herself for silencing. The officer ordered the convoy to keep moving, too exposed here, too dangerous to linger. But Elena didn't rise. She stayed kneeling by the wreckage, her hand pressed against the scorched helmet, her face unreadable. Hayes moved closer, crouching beside her. His voice was low, raw. She was your partner. Elena's hand trembled. You were flying together, he whispered, piecing it aloud. You broke a rule, and she died for it. Her jaw clenched, her eyes burned. But no words came. She didn't need them. Because Hayes finally understood. Her silence wasn't discipline, it was penance. The convoy pushed on into night. The sky swallowed light, stars spilling cold and sharp overhead. Fires burned behind them where the wreckage smoldered, a grave left in the dark. Hayes sat in the truck bed, his mind spiraling. He thought of his own mistakes, the rules he had mocked, the orders he had ignored, times he had laughed, thinking nothing would ever break him. But what if it had cost someone else? What if he carried a silence like hers? The thought hollowed him out. He glanced at her, sitting across from him, the firelight of memory flickering in her eyes. And for the first time, he didn't just respect her. He grieved with her. Hours later, the ambush came. Explosions ripped through the dark, blinding flashes lighting the desert. Vehicles buckled, metal shrieked, soldiers screamed. Enemy fire erupted from the dunes, tracers slicing the night sky. The convoy scattered, weapons barking, the desert a storm of chaos. Hayes dove into the dirt, his rifle kicking against his shoulder. The enemy came in waves, shadows rising from sand, pouring gunfire into steel. The officer's voice cracked over comms, orders lost in panic. And then Elena rose. She moved through fire and smoke, her silhouette a steady force in the storm. Her hands cut the air, signals sharp, commanding. Soldiers rallied to her gestures, shifting lines, focusing fire. Even in chaos, she made them a unit. Even without words, she gave them a chance. Hayes fought beside her, his fear replaced with something fiercer. He covered her flank, firing where her hand pointed, moving when her signals demanded. Together they carved through the assault, each step forward a refusal to die. But then, a blast threw Hayes off his feet. His ears rang, his vision blurred. He hit the ground hard, breath ripped from his lungs. Through the haze he saw her, Elena on her knees clutching her side. Smoke curled around her, blood staining her uniform. No, Hayes roared, scrambling toward her. Bullets cracked past, dust exploded around him, but he didn't stop. He reached her, dragging her behind the wreck of a burning truck. Her face was pale, jaw clenched, eyes still sharp despite the wound. She grabbed his vest, yanking him close. Her lips moved. One word. Go. Hayes shook his head violently. No, not leaving you. Her grip tightened, her eyes blazed. This time she didn't need to speak. The look was enough. The mission, keep them alive, finish this. Hayes's chest shattered, but he nodded, choking back everything inside him. He rose, rifle tight, and fought like he had never fought before. Every pull of the trigger was for her. Every breath was borrowed from her silence. The battle raged until the dunes were littered with bodies, smoke curling into the endless night. The enemy broke, retreating into shadows, their fire fading into distance. The survivors gathered, weapons shaking in their hands, breaths ragged. Hayes stumbled back to her. Elena lay against the wreck, blood soaking her uniform, her notebook clutched in her hand. He dropped to his knees, pulling it gently from her grasp. His hands shook as he opened it. Pages filled with writing, rules, notes, memories. And one page, just one, filled with a name written over and over. Lara. Hayes's vision blurred. He gritted his teeth, forcing words past the lump in his throat. I'll carry it. I'll carry her. You don't have to do it alone anymore. Elena's hand lifted weakly, brushing his face. Her eyes softened. And for the first time, her lips moved again. Not a word, just a whisper of breath. But he understood it. Thank you. Dawn broke slow and unforgiving. The convoy moved again, smaller, quieter, broken but breathing. Hayes sat in silence, Elena beside him, pale but alive, her notebook resting in his lap. She hadn't spoken again, maybe she never would. But she didn't need to. Because he finally understood what her silence meant. It wasn't weakness. It wasn't emptiness. It was love. And it was loss. The road ahead stretched endless, the mission still unfinished, but Hayes knew one thing. They would make it. Because of her. Because sometimes the strongest voice wasn't heard. It was carried in silence. Why did silence feel heavier than any weapon? The convoy crawled forward, battered and reduced, each wheel grinding against sand as if the desert itself wanted them buried. Smoke from the battle still clung to their uniforms, the smell of burnt metal and blood refusing to fade. Hayes sat in the back of the truck, Elena leaning against the steel wall beside him. Her uniform was still stained, her bandaged side seeping through. She hadn't spoken since the firefight. Maybe she never would. But she hadn't let go of her rifle either, or her resolve. The sun rose hard and white, unforgiving. Ahead, the officer's voice cracked over comms. We're close. The outpost is just beyond the ridge. Home, safety, and end. But Hayes couldn't shake the dread. Endings rarely came without a price. They reached the ridge at noon. Heat shimmered, bending the horizon. The outpost stood below, sand-colored walls, antennas bristling, the flag hanging heavy in the scorching air. Relief swept through the convoy. Some cheered weakly. Others slumped in their seats, too drained even to celebrate. Hayes glanced at Elena. She stared down at the outpost, her jaw tight, her silence sharper than ever. He realized it then. She didn't trust it. And she was right. The first mortar hit before the flagpole came into focus. The explosion ripped sand skyward, a shockwave slamming into the convoy. Vehicles rocked. Screams tore through the air. "Ambush!" someone shouted. The ridgeline erupted with fire. Rockets, mortars, gunfire, an inferno pouring down on them. The outpost below was already burning. Smoke gushed from shattered walls, flames licking skyward. It wasn't salvation. It was a trap. Panic spread like wildfire. Some soldiers fired blindly uphill. Others ducked, scrambling for cover. Hayes's gut clenched. This wasn't an attack. This was annihilation. And in the center of it all, Elena stood. She climbed from the truck, her frame outlined against fire and smoke, her signals sharp and precise. She directed soldiers to the ridge, pointed fire toward weak flanks, guided medics to the wounded. Even bleeding, even limping, she was unbreakable. Hayes felt the same surge he had felt before. She didn't need words. She didn't need shouts. She commanded through silence, through certainty, through a presence that couldn't be ignored. And once again, they followed her. The battle stretched brutal. Every push uphill cost blood. Every yard of ground felt like a mile. The enemy had dug in, hidden bunkers spitting fire, their positions nearly impossible to reach. Hayes fought until his shoulders burned, until his throat was raw from breathing smoke. But he never strayed far from her. Every time she pointed, he moved. Every time she signaled, he covered. And every time she stumbled, he caught her. It wasn't duty anymore. It was something deeper. By nightfall, they had clawed their way into the ridgeline, the desert lit by fire and tracer rounds. The outpost below burned like a grave. And then, the last mortar position roared to life. Hayes saw it too late. A flash of fire, a plume of smoke, a shell screaming toward their line. It struck the ridge. The ground convulsed. The blast tore them apart. Hayes slammed against stone, his vision ringing with white. When the dust cleared, he saw her. Elena. On her knees, body curled over a soldier half her size, shielding him, saving him. Her notebook lay open in the dirt, its pages flapping in the wind. Hayes's chest seized. He crawled toward her, dragging his rifle, dragging himself, every muscle screaming. He reached her just as she collapsed. Her breathing was ragged, shallow. Her eyes found him. He grabbed her hand, gripping it tight, his voice breaking. "Stay with me, please. You've carried enough. Let me carry it now." Her lips trembled. No words came. But she didn't need them. She lifted her other hand weakly, pushing the notebook into his chest. The same notebook she had never let go. Hayes clutched it, tears burning his eyes. And then her hand fell still. The firefight ebbed. Reinforcements finally arrived, their gunships scouring the ridgeline, silence falling heavy after hours of chaos. The survivors stood hollow, the price of survival written in their faces. Hayes stood among them, his uniform torn, blood streaked across his skin. In his hand, the notebook. He opened it one last time. The final page wasn't filled with rules, or strategies, or maps. It was a single sentence, written in steady, careful ink. Silence is not the absence of strength. It is the weight of love carried past breaking. Hayes's throat closed, his vision blurred. He shut the notebook gently, pressing it against his chest. And in that moment, he knew her silence wasn't penance anymore. It was her legacy. Dawn bled across the desert the next day. The convoy, or what was left of it, moved again. Hayes rode at the front now, his eyes fixed on the horizon. the notebook tucked safely inside his vest. He didn't mock rules anymore. He didn't question orders. He carried them because she had taught him what they meant. Not blind obedience, not punishment, but the fragile thread between life and loss. He never heard her voice, not once, but he heard her silence. Every time the wind cut through sand, every time a soldier shifted nervously, waiting for courage, every time he held his breath before battle. Her silence lived, and it spoke louder than any words could. When people asked him later how they had survived, Hayes never told the whole story. He never told them about Lara, or the notebook, or the way she had looked at him in her final breath. He only said one thing. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. The screen would fade to black, music slow, heavy. And the image left behind wouldn't be of fire, or explosions, or even victory. It would be of her, Elena, standing against the horizon, silent, resolute, her shadow long across the desert. A silence that lingered, even after she was gone.